Hello there and welcome. Today, I wanted to have a bit more of a casual chat about some of my favorite museums that I have visited over the years. And instead of me just sitting here and reading you a list, I thought it would be really fun to have a guest on to chat about their favorite museums too. So please welcome Cosi of Cosi's Odyssey to the channel.
Hi! Very, very happy to be here. Feeling very excited. This is like my favorite thing in the world is talking about this kind of stuff. So I'm
Oh, me
just,
too. I'm really excited to see like where this conversation goes because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to museums for some reason. So,
I feel
yeah,
like we're going to start yelling and I'm excited.
okay, absolutely. Before we start yelling though, do you just want to very briefly introduce yourself and who you are? What you're about?
What's
That
my
sort of
deal?
thing.
I love
What's your
that.
deal?
Um, so, hello everyone. My name is Cosi, and I run the small business Cosi's Odyssey, which is all about making the ancient world and ancient history more accessible for sort of modern and diverse audiences. And I've been doing it for about 4 years now, and it sort of takes the form of events, products, writing, collaborations, content creation, all kinds of different things. And yeah, I feel like that's my concise spiel. Yeah, that's my bag. I love old dusty stuff. I love making really disappointing puns about it. And yeah, that's that's kind of my shtick, if you will, summed up in like two sentences.
If people wanted to say follow you on social media, where can they find you?
I am on Instagram. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and I've got a Substack, which is where the sort of meatier, juicier stuff is. So I'm all over the place. And I'm sure Christy's going to whack the links in the video description. So just head on down there.
I sure will. I sure will. So please go and check out those links. But without further ado, I guess let's just, as they say on YouTube, let's just jump into it. I guess I have a very big question to start off with. How many museums would you say you've been to over the course of your life? Is that even a question that you can answer?
Honestly, have no idea. I was talking to my partner about it today and he just looked at me and laughed and was like, more than seven. I was like, yes,
Yeah,
technically
not
that is correct.
inaccurate.
So a part of my business and sort of the stuff I've been doing with that is a lot of travel. And so I've been very, very lucky to be able to visit piles of museums all over the place. So I mean, at a guess, I'm thinking more than 80,
Hmm?
maybe all up. Does that sound right? I mean, what
I
about
have
you? How many?
I have no idea.
Like, that's like a
uh,
wild, like, assign a number. I'm like, oh my
yeah.
God.
I can't I also can't give a solid number, but I'd probably say the 30s.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
30s or
Yeah.
40s. But also, another question like that could possibly spur a tangent is, do we consider heritage sites museums? Especially if they have interpretation, because I think for me, if you've got interpretation and you're talking about history at a certain spot.
Honestly, frankly, I've never thought about it like that. And for me, there's been, and just because of the way that, I was learning in uni and the way that I've, like, I guess, sort of engaged with these sites, I've thought of, museums as one thing and archaeological and heritage sites as another. But when you put it as simply as you just did, of, there's artifacts, there's history, and there's interpretation, that is like technically the whole thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole thing. Is
That's what
it
it's
like
all about.
because, right? Like that's the whole shebang. And maybe because it's like outdoors, but then you have like outdoor immersive museums. It's like, any way you're trying to finesse that definition isn't really holding up. So I would say, I think for both of our kind of way that we're engaging with the material, I think 100% you could include heritage sites as, a part of, I don't know, the museum family umbrella,
Yeah.
whatever random word we're going to throw at it. But yeah, I mean, that really resonates with me. And I think
Hmm.
as well, like you can, I mean, more often than not, have a far more, I mean, I'm going to sound like such a wanker, but a more profound experience in those kind of sites than you necessarily are given in an incredibly crowded, overly, artificially lit museum. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if we're kind of broadening this out further, which is like, what is the point of museums and what kind of effect, what's the desired effect to have on people? I mean, I would argue it's an emotional connection with the past, right?
Hmm.
And so then the heritage sites and archaeological sites achieve that in some ways better than a lot of museums. Yes.
I think there's also something to be said, like to your point of like an emotional connection, to be in a spot where something big happened, whether it was good or bad, or just to know that somebody, even like a castle or a historic house or something, to know that these people who you've learned about through the course of the interpretation, or you just learn about through school or whatever, to be able to like walk those same hallways, those
Mm,
climb those same staircases, and to be in the same space, like to be where it happened, definitely has like a more immersive and connected feel to it than, as you said, kind of being in like a bit of more of
mm.
a sterile museum environment. So
And like very humbling and moving, right? Like
yeah, it has
very, very
that
powerful.
that effect for sure. Especially I think like on sites of, well, trauma and tragedy, I, even if somebody walks into it not really thinking much of it, but then to actually go and be like, oh, like bad things happened here, or
Mm,
bad things came about as a result of things that happened here, also is a lot more impactful than just like reading about it on an interpretive panel
mm.
in a museum that's coolly lit.
I was thinking about that today, and then this is related to what we're talking about right now as far as context and the role of context. And then when you're looking at a historical or heritage site that it's existing within its original context, that 100% facilitates, you know, the impact and also of course the education, which is such a big part of it. But I was thinking, about sort of my favorite museums and some of the most memorable moments I've had in them. And I remember, sort of the first time I went to the Acropolis Museum. And I mean, for those of you that haven't visited, it's this like beautiful, very modern building with just massive amounts of glass and like heaps of natural light flowing in. And then you can see the Acropolis on top of the hill from where you are inside the museum, like
Wow.
looking at the artifacts. It's like it's gobsmacking. Like the way that they've done it, it lives up to the hype. It exceeds the hype. Like it is spectacular. And so I think what they've managed to successfully do there speaks to quite a significant issue that I think a lot of these museums have, right? So they've actually managed to be like, yes, okay, it's in the same city. We can't just erect this giant, gloriously modern building on top of the hill for
Mm-hmm.
reasons. So how are we going to address that problem? How are we going to actually facilitate the kind of narrative connection, the historical connection between these artifacts that are, not in their original context and the actual structure, which kind of imbues these pieces with so much meaning. And so they actually managed to solve that problem. And so then with particular heritage sites, they kind of, don't necessarily have to consider that as much because it's like, bang, you're in it, you're getting immersed in it.
Yeah.
But then if we think about something like the British Museum, which is, offers so much to so many different people, it gives you like a huge, wide slice of so many different cultures and so much history. But any attempt to root the artifacts in their original context, it's just
So I've only been to the British Museum twice, two times, twice. I went with my mom once, and I went
stunning.
on my own. And like my mom and I were there for about 7.5 hours. And my mom was a good sport because she's into history, like a lot more casually than I am. So she was a very good sport about it. But like there's just so much. And I remember like there's only a couple things that really stand out to me from that visit. Like there were a couple items that I wanted to see, but for the most part, like I think that there was an exhibit on like Chinese textiles or something like there was like a feature exhibit that we didn't even get to, and we spent
Yeah.
7.5 hours there, like, which is and if you put it into the context of how probably only about 1% of their collection is actually available to the public, you're just like,
Oh,
holy crap, like
well, it just incentivizes checklist visits, right? Like
yeah,
that's, and it's like the Louvre, where it's you, if you're there visiting, if you don't live there, if you're there visiting, if you can afford to give it an entire day,
yeah,
you roll in knowing that you want to see as much as you can see. There are
this
some
ain't gonna take 30 minutes.
like it's not going to take 30 minutes, and then it's like the I mean, it's complicated because of how famous and renowned the collection at the British Museum is. It's like you've got the Rosetta Stone, you know, they've got the Parthenon marbles there. Like you can just roll around and burn through some of the most like famous pieces of history and archaeology in the world, same as the
Yeah,
Louvre. It's like you do actually, you know, you want to say that you've seen the Mona Lisa. You want to see that you've seen Nike and the Venus de Milo, and you know, and obviously I'm showing my classics bias here because those are the only artifacts I'm referencing. But you know, like it does, I think, kind of feed into that. You're going to tick off certain things. You're
yeah.
going because you want to say that you've seen certain things in person, and I don't think that's bad. It's just, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to visit lots of different museums. And I mean, I did have a very positive experience at the Louvre, but I honestly, I had a list of stuff I wanted to see. I had 4 hours. I was there on my own, and I ran around. I ran around. I tried as hard as I could to like carve out time, like zen with it. I cried when I saw Nike. I sat in like the gorgeous marble sculpture bit on my own for like 20 minutes, and I was still hooning around,
Hmm.
hooning around. So it's like, I don't know what exact purpose that serves, I guess. I mean,
Because I think you brought up a really interesting point, because like, these institutions exist and they're full of stuff and they're not going to go away anytime soon. But there is something to be said, I think, about having time to like contemplate what you've seen and what you've learned, because it's just like an informational kind of barrage against you when you walk through those like massive, like, and our provincial museums in Canada are definitely not as big as the British Museum and the Louvre, but they're still a lot. I've thrown this term around in other videos that I've made, and it was a term that I learned actually during an exhibit design course, and it's called museum fatigue. And it said,
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and for the uninitiated, it basically is that the common person has about 15 minutes of reading in them at an institution before they just kind of start glazing. And this is like, everybody's different. Like, my partner will like stand and read every single information panel, uh
Everything.
everything, and it drives, I'm very much a skimmer when it comes to
Oh,
interpretive
yeah. I
panels.
jog through. I
Yeah,
jog through.
yeah, it depends on what it is, like, not to like toot my own horn here, or the horn of the place that I work at, but like, I really like the setup of the museum that I work at, because you have the visitor center where there's a temporary exhibit and it takes like 15 minutes probably. If you read every single panel, you could spend up to 30 minutes if you're a really, really slow reader. But I think it probably takes most people like 10, 20 minutes tops. And then you have to go outside and into the gardens, and it kind of gives like your brain like a little bit of a break.
That's
And
so
then you
smart.
go into the historic house, and then you are uh attacked by docents who have fun facts. And you're also like, with actually having a
I thought
tour
you were going to
guide.
say attacked by dogs. I don't know
No.
why. I was like, I really need to learn more about what your workplace, and
Oh
are
yeah,
you
we just set
okay?
dogs loose every once in a while. No, I think that because we have docents, and I think that there's also something to be said about having somebody to talk to and somebody to ask questions with. And I think in general, if I think about like tours and things that I've been on versus just being in a museum, I think I learn more and I remember more when
100%.
I'm having a conversation or when I'm, it's a bit more casual that way. It's not me sitting and reading somebody's master's thesis on a wall. So,
Which, like, slay, we love, nothing but
yeah,
support. I would love for my master's thesis to be on a wall, but
yeah.
it's not
But,
necessarily the easiest reading.
well, yeah, most people are going to read like maybe the first paragraph or they're going to see a wall of
Mm.
text. They're going to go, yeah, no, thanks. So
Yeah.
it's nice to have somebody there to kind of walk you through the history a little bit too, especially if you're like the common, not you and I, especially like I like that, but I think for the common man,
Well, I
woman,
think
non-binary person to have somebody to be able to talk to about these things, I think also adds to the impact.
I think that's a really good point, and I think this I'm exposing myself here like 100%, but I think so much of what I do and the work I do is because I'm much more like the common person than I
Mm.
am like a sort of traditional academic person, because museums after a while, and I love them. This is my favorite thing in the world. This is my passion. This is my baby. This is my whole life. And I roll in and I'm like, you've got this much span. This is how much is available in my brain to like
Mm-hmm.
actually walk, absorb, read, and for the things that particularly jump out at me, I take a photo of the little,
Yes.
panel
Yeah.
so I can consult it later. But I mean, and I just always have that in my mind where I'm like, this is how much I can give a museum. And I
Mm-hmm.
have an ancient history degree and I'm starting my master's in classics in October. It's like, and this is my capacity. So it's like, how
How
we need to
is,
open this up. We need to crack this open because damn.
yeah, I completely agree. We
I have
have,
a question for you. I'd be very curious to hear what you think about whether or not they should, like, museums should limit the amount of people that can be in them at any one time. Big
hmm,
question, hard question, ethically hard, etc., etc. But if we're talking about how what is very important and very special is that moment of reflection, I think a lot of people tend to get very, very overwhelmed, myself included, in
hmm,
very big, very busy, very loud museums. And obviously it's not great for accessibility if
no.
we start limiting the numbers. But as far as guest experience, I mean, maybe it's like an after hours thing and then they racket up the prices or something. I mean, that just came to mind as like, what would you think about that, like pros and cons?
So I guess the first thought is we had at my museum, we had a capacity limit for the historic house during COVID. And it
Sure.
didn't really impact us at all. And even then we still kind of have like a capacity limit just because it's an old house. She's tired. She
She's
can only
tired.
handle so much.
She's
Um,
been through a lot.
she's been through a lot.
I mean, just to like throw another example out into the call, if you will. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking about the Gallery Borghese in Rome. It's Rome, not Florence. And they have a really tight cap. But I have to say, like, it was one of the most special museum experiences of my life. And I think honestly, I would have lost a lot of that had it been jammed full of people to the point where
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't actually engage with any of the sculptures without anyone in front of you.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I mean, I'm sure they're getting their margins with the ticket prices, but the ticket prices weren't exorbitant. It was literally a planning thing, which is like, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
go, you have to think in advance. That was it. And you go in, I think it's like you get a 2 hour slot and you just walk around, as many times as you want. And it keeps it very, for lack of a better word, like very mellow, the whole
Mm-hmm.
experience. So I saw it work well in that instance. But then if we're thinking about these bigger museums like the British Museum and the Louvre and the Met in New York, where people are literally flying from all over the world to come and see this stuff. Is that practical? Not necessarily.
Yeah. I guess it very much depends on the institution, I think. And I think that, and maybe this is me being naive because I've never designed an entire museum, but I think,
I can't imagine it's easy. It's very easy for us to sit here and be
yeah,
like, well, well.
yeah. But I think that having, like, leaving space for people to sit and for people to, like, kind of like quiet spaces, I guess, like not just to have like walls of stuff, I think is really important, and I think might help with that. Mind you, the British Museum, and if we're talking about that as kind of like our base example, is very open and has lots of space. But I guess I'm definitely for the idea of like limiting capacity in those larger institutions. I think that there's definitely something to be said about, being shuffled through those giant institutions and just feeling like overwhelmed, crowded. I don't love crowds. A lot of the people
Who
in my life don't
does?
like crowds.
No.
But I think that my main concern is just, I really like it when museums are free. I think that all museums inherently should be free. That is my personal belief. I think that we shouldn't have these things behind a paywall, and I think that these institutions should be public or funded by the government and things like that. So I guess my main concern is just with that capacity limit, are there going to be people who are going to be left out because they might not have the ability to, they might not have a phone, they might not be able to log in and make an appointment or something like that. So that's kind of my main concern overall, though. Like, I think it's a definitely a good idea, but
it's definitely a good concern, like
yeah,
a important concern for sure, is the accessibility thing. And I think that's what so many of these institutions sort of grapple with, is like doing that dance. And it's very tricky. Not a simple, it was not a simple question, so I'm sorry.
well, I
You
have
can
a
hit me with
very,
one. Hit me with like a frivolous one, or you can hit me with a really hard one. I'm down.
it is both frivolous and possibly difficult.
Oh no.
What is your favorite museum that you've ever visited? Just like what is your like gut reaction? Like, don't think
God.
about it.
No, see, the thing is, I mean, as you can imagine, I get asked this semi-regularly. And I actually have an answer, but I just an honorable mention before the proper answer. Honorable mention does go to the Acropolis Museum for the
Mhm.
reasons that I was talking to you about earlier. Very, very special, does a great job of connecting you to a very strong sense of history and a really profound sense of place,
Mhm.
which felt incredible. And even, the fact that there's a cafe with a view of the Acropolis, so you go, you see
Certainly
everything,
helps.
right? Like it's all these little things, where you're just like, this is just a dream, and you're getting swept up in this like massive cultural experience that is so much more than you reading the panels and looking at the stuff and taking gorgeous photos of some really special stuff, which is wonderful, which is important, not necessarily the whole thing.
Mhm.
But on to my proper answer. It's a bit random, but I stand by it and will die on this hill because I just have just very, very strong feelings about this museum. It's in Peru and it's called the Museo Larco. And
Okay.
I was just floored, start to finish. And it was wonderful because I went to Peru and I literally posted on my like Cosi's Odyssey Instagram story, just being like, da, 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 go to Peru. Who's got any recommendations? And someone just sent this in and was like, go there. And I was like, okay, sure. Like, never heard of it. Chill. I'm in Peru. I'm going to drag my boyfriend to a museum. Sure. Stunning. Like, no expectations, never heard of it. Classic me. Didn't Google it, didn't do anything, just like rolled up and was like, sure, I'm sure it'll be fabulous. I trust my
Mm.
followers with my life, whatever. But just rolled in, and it was the feeling of, oh my God, this is what a museum should be like. Everything was in 5 languages. Everything.
Wow.
Every single panel was in 5 languages. And you roll up and it's gorgeous. And it was this like water being infused with like orange and mint or whatever that's free from all these little glasses like right outside. And then you go in and it was Oh, it was so thought out. It was so considered. Every tiny little moment was considered. The writing was big, the signs were big. It was sort of intimate, like intimate dim lighting, like me right now with my random lamp, but
It's
it was
like we're
that
there
perfect.
right now.
I've transported you. Um, and you know, it was that perfect mix of lighting where like you can see everything really well, you can read everything, but it's not that
Mhm.
kind of like like you're at the dentist kind of vibe, which
Yeah.
sometimes can be there. Um, and it pulled you through the space. It had been so carefully planned that there was this very, very clear historical narrative that was just this kind of gentle current that was taking you around these like little like serpentine flow of everything. Everything was clearly numbered. There were big things giving you a general overview. There were like all these little detailed things. The artifacts themselves were stunning. And I just remember the accessibility of it. When I was there, I was like, I have never been in a museum where it's felt so like ready for visitors and ready for a very wide range of visitors. And I was like, uh,
This is how it's supposed to be.
this is how it's supposed to be. And I'm like in Peru at a museum I've never heard of. And I was like, what? Like, this was just, it was incredible. And so that was the sort of archaeological historical. Oh, and okay, there are two more things about it. I'm getting very overexcited. There's
No,
one
please
more
do.
thing. Oh my God, this is like, whew. Another thing that floored me, and again, was the moment of like, oh, so this is what museums could be doing. Oh my God, their storage was open. Their
Oh,
storage was open. So you go through the whole main thing. You do the reading. You have your random orange mint water. You're just like vibing, thriving. You go out into the gorgeous courtyard, and then there's a sign that says like storage. And I was like, surely not. No way. You go in, and it was just like shelves of Neolithic artifacts,
oh my
like
God.
stone blades and stuff. And for me, like there was something so moving about seeing the actual like entire
Hmm.
assemblage all there. And I think a part of it, which obviously a lot of museums try and protect people from, is like being overwhelmed. But for me, it was so wonderful to be given the opportunity to actually look at the full collection. And I was like, this is incredible. Like, and I'm struggling to think of another museum that would just be like, here's the main thing. Look, it's so pretty and fabulous. If you want to go and see the dusty, random stuff that we haven't sorted out and that doesn't really fit in with the main thing,
There
there's the
it is.
door.
I do love it when museums have that kind of behind the scenes aspect to
Oh,
it. I've been to a couple museums where like the conservation lab is actually like they have like a wall. So it's all been in Canadian museums actually that I've seen that. It was at a dinosaur museum in Alberta, which was really cool. They were like chiseling something out of a rock,
oh.
which was amazing.
And it's like, I
And
don't care if you're paid actors. I just want to see. Like, that's
yeah,
just
yeah,
cool.
go for it. But also even if it's like not during like general like working hours,
Mm,
you can still see what they're working on, which is really
mm,
cool. And yeah, they also had that at the Royal Alberta Museum as well. And I just love that because you can see, well, it's important, I think, to show that because it shows how much work goes into the maintenance of these collections, and it shows how much work just goes into having a museum. And it's like instead of trying to keep it like hush hush behind closed doors, and it kind of puts the value on that work. It shows the
mm.
value. It's like we are paying somebody to have to chisel this T-Rex out of a rock, like or what
That
have you,
just
right?
sounds so cool. No, I completely agree. And also, as far as like sort of getting people curious, getting people to Google things, getting people to
Mm-hmm.
ask questions, and getting them more sort of engaged and interested in the actual processes. When you're actually seeing it, 100%, you definitely like, I guess, like strengthen your relationship with all of it, or kind of,
I think that that kind of ties into other things that we've been talking about. It's like I think what is missing from a lot of museums is like the human element. It's like we're
mm-hmm.
talking about the history of humanity in a lot of these
And
institutions,
yet, and
and
yet,
yet you're just in this like sterile room with like a statue or something. But if you have somebody there to like walk you through it, or if you have somebody working on it, it again kind of recontextualizes it and kind of has a different impact than if you're just like breezing by it on your way to go see the Mona Lisa.
The Mona Lisa,
The Mona Lisa.
as she will now be known. To what you were saying about the museum that you work for, there was that natural breathing room of like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a separate building, it's a separate
Yeah.
thing. It gives you a moment to kind of reflect, collect yourself, and then refreshed, be able to sort of enter the next stage. And then moved through that. It was hilarious and interesting, of course. And then there's this stunning cafe with delicious food in a garden. I was like, this has just been 11 out of 10 from start to finish.
Cafes, I feel like, are a very underrated part of museums.
Well, because if you're there for 7.5 hours, for
Yeah.
example, you
Mm-hmm.
better believe you're going to take a second to have a coffee, if not an entire meal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having a space where you can just like sit.
Mm.
Um, I know my museum, if we are still going to be open in a few weeks and if I still have a job,
Oh
we were
my
really,
God.
yeah, it's not a good time right now. We were hoping to build like a gazebo or something out, and because we have gardens, which is already like a really nice like breathing space, but
Mm.
to have like a place to a proper place to sit and reflect that's not just like a bench.
Yeah. And like I have time for the benches. I've sat on many. They're lovely. But
Mhm.
having somewhere where there's kind of a bit of psychological separation so you can kind of woo and then back in.
Exactly. Well said. Oh, I didn't
Mm.
tell you about my favorite museum.
Oh my God. Yeah, how rude of
Um,
me. I didn't ask you.
it
Are
is
you like
a-okay.
obligated by contract to say that it's your museum?
No. I
Just
mean, it is one of my favorites. But
beautiful.
like,
Very, very appropriate and professional answer.
yes. I have a slight bias though.
A
Um,
tiny one.
I think it's pretty cool, but I don't know if anybody else thinks it's cool. My favorite museum, and this is again just like my gut reaction to something that I just remembered,
Mhm.
is this tiny museum. I don't even like I can't even say that it's like a kind of quote unquote good museum under the parameters that you and I have been talking about, but it's just one that I really enjoyed the content and material of, and it's the Writers' Museum in Edinburgh. I don't know
Oh,
if you've ever heard of that or been
I've
there. It's like
never heard of that.
I think it's just off like the Royal Mile is like the main kind of tourist trap area.
Mhm.
And it is it's focused on I think like a couple different writers like uh the big Scottish poet, I think Walter Scott. But what really stuck out to me was Robert Louis Stevenson. It had like a whole bunch of material from him, and it was almost like somebody's like apartment. It was really strange. Like
Wow.
you would go up this like winding staircase, and they had manuscripts, and there was like a telescope. And I think at the time I was just really into Robert Louis Stevenson, and I was really into like old travel logs and things. I don't have a particular reason as to why it stuck out to me or anything, especially
Well, I
because
mean,
it was like
intimacy, right?
almost a decade ago. Yeah, it was intimacy. I think I was the only person in that building aside from like the
I mean,
docents.
that's exactly what we've been talking about, which is like,
Yes.
the whole overwhelmed crowded thing. You could do it at exactly your own pace and no external pressures, nothing like
Yeah.
jangling your nerves. You could just move through it.
Yeah. I think I just liked the vibe of the whole place, and it passed the vibe check, as the
The
youths
vibes
say.
are hugely important. Like I honestly, I wanted us to get into this, which is, we've been talking about how important context and education and history is, and I think you and I would both agree until our dying breath that that is hugely important.
Hmm.
But I think what people, you know, might not necessarily factor in that much is like it's a sensory visual experience. That is what
Yes.
it is. You
Yes.
are not necessarily, unless you have an incredible brain, going to be able to remember what you've read on a particular panel from something 10 years ago, but you will remember, you will have flashes of what you saw, and you will remember how you felt, which
Yes.
is where architecture, lighting, space, everything comes into it. It's about what feeling it can create,
Hmm.
and then you associate those feelings with the particular things you saw, and then you feel more connected to what you've been lucky enough to see, like 100%. I think you're
Absolutely.
making like six very important points. 100%.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Accidentally. Um, Totally on
Don't
purpose.
even.
On
Yes,
purpose.
on purpose.
Yes. Yeah, it was just really cool. I remember there were sketches, there were like doodles and things from him, and yeah, the vibe was just right.
And it's also the
Um,
thing, right? Sometimes it just hits you at the right time. Like it's the
yeah,
right kind of
I
day,
think
you're in the right kind of mood,
that was it.
you're
I
just
think
open to it in a particular way.
yeah. I think yeah, I was traveling and I was reading about somebody else's travels and it was lovely. It was a not something it was very much the same as your museum in Peru. It was like I just kind of I saw the sign and was like, "Oh, okay.
Sure.
Sure,
Roll
sign me
in.
up. Why not? I guess this is what I'm doing this afternoon." So, I have to say though, on the topic of like really neatly designed museums or rather exhibits, this because this was a temporary exhibit a few years ago, and I think it actually came from the UK originally, but it came to the big museum in town here, and it was the Titanic exhibit. And I remember hearing, and I've heard so many good things about it. It came up in my exhibit design course, and I'm just like kicking myself that like 19, I think it was like 19 at the time, like 19-year-old me didn't go, but I was like, I'm not interested in that. But
I
it
don't care about the
sounded
Titanic.
so cool. So let me explain how I guess this like again, this is like secondhand information that I have, but I'll see if I can find like a floor plan for the folks at home. But basically you started in the exhibit and you were given a name and you were given basically a class. So
Stop.
you
Like
were given
immersive vibes.
so immersive. So you were given a name of somebody who was on the ship, and you were either going to go to like the first class, which was one way, and you kind of went and saw all of the things that would have filled the suites and how first class in the Titanic would have looked. And I'm sure you learned a lot about their experiences and things. But then if you got like lower middle class, you went the other way. And so
Oh my
people would
God.
go like come back and like take different names. And as you went through the exhibit at the very end, you also had like your name of the person who was on the Titanic, and you got to find out if you lived or died at the end, which was a really interesting design to me. And
That's
you're
like
also like,
morbid murder mystery vibes.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And it sounded like it covered like a lot of the things from like some museums really like to talk about like a very narrow focus on things, which can be fine. But when everything is just about like colonial white people doing colonial white people things, it can get a little bit old, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Strong agree.
So
Strong agree.
I like hearing about like what I would have been up to 100 years ago, basically, the other Joe Schmoes, the other lower middle class people. And I I like I'm always really curious and drawn to like the workers and things like that.
Mm.
So
Well, it's like
I
it adds such an interesting element of drama and
yeah.
randomness, which makes you feel so much more connected to the story.
Well, it also encourages you to kind of go through it more than once too,
Mm,
because you're
which
like,
is
oh,
smart.
you know that you missed something. So you're like,
Mm,
oh, I gotta go and see like what first class is like, or I gotta go see what, the pores were up to on the
God,
Titanic. So
that's thrown me for a loop. I've never heard of anything like that.
like
Wow.
just like stunning museum design like that, and just being able to play with exhibits and things.
Like that concept, that's one of the coolest, most creative concepts.
And I
Wow.
never got to see it, and I'm forever kicking myself.
I'm like mad at 19-year-old you now.
I know.
I'm like, wow.
She was a little rough around the edges. So
She was a sweet, naive baby, as we all were.
yes. So we have talked about our your favorite museum.
Yeah.
Um, do you have a favorite just like temporary exhibit?
I feel like we should
If you
also
don't
talk
have
about.
one, you don't have
I mean,
to.
I don't think it's my favorite, but the one that sprang to mind immediately was the women in Power One at the British Museum.
Hmm.
But I mean, it was cool because of the collection of stuff that they were showing. But it wasn't particularly oomph, like it didn't kind of get over that line of making a big emotional impact. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's because I'm so in the world of, depictions of women throughout history. And so maybe it's just because that's like my entire life and all of the
Mm-hmm.
content I consume on like all of the various platforms. So I was just kind of like, yeah, like this is dope having them all together, but it wasn't giving me that same kind of like that
Yeah.
I necessarily
Somebody
wanted
who
them to.
wasn't as immersed in that all of the time might have had a bit more of an
Exactly. It
impact
might
on.
have, exactly. It might have, sort of meant more. And then there was an interesting kind of immersive thing at the end where you could write in, I think it was something like, what does womanhood mean to you, or blah, blah, blah. And then you could literally like write something and it would come up on the wall. And so then you were
Mm,
watching all of the different ones that people had been writing in that day and you could
that's
kind
really
of
cool.
contribute. So that was cool. That was when I'm like, big museums. I'm like, when you've got the cash and you're putting it in the tech like that and it's actually creating something cool, I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm fucking with that.
Maybe leading from your kind of comment on like immersiveness, like what is the because like when you're designing an exhibit, you always want to try and have something that people can kind of like interact with directly. So like in our temporary exhibit at work, we have like a drawer that people can open and it's like, ooh, more stuff, like things like
Ooh,
it's like very, very like cheap and simple. But then there are
but
bigger
cool.
things. Yeah, it kind of
Mm,
it's fun to have like a bit of it, as you said earlier, like it's all museums are a very sensory kind of environment. And so to have something to touch. Do you have like a favorite kind of immersive or sensory aspect of a museum or an exhibit that you've been to?
there's something that I sort of experienced a little bit, which was really, really cool. It was back in Australia at the Hellenic Museum in Melbourne. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how big this program is. It could still just be in Oz, but it's called Lithodomos and it's virtual reality. And it's so cool. It was in the Hellenic Museum's Gods, Myths, and Mortals exhibit. And you would essentially like scan a QR code on your phone, and then the entire recreated virtual reality of all of like ancient Greece was just on your phone.
Oh
And you
wow.
would, oh my God, and you would walk around. And it's a very small exhibit, not a lot
Mm-hmm.
going on. But I think there was maybe like 1 to 7 of the main sort of, you know, really special artifacts there. And you would literally, you'd like point at one, it's like this tiny little gold thing of Aphrodite or Athena. And then it would like, take you to the temple that's been recreated by archaeologists. And obviously they found someone who knows how to code, or an archaeologist, knows how to code. We love. And so then there was that kind of immersiveness. And again, the kind of, you could click on the little things, you could explore, and it just transported you to the context visually. And of course, that's, an attempt to tackle the problem we were talking about, which is like, if you're not in the context, how do you facilitate people feeling connected to the original context? And the virtual reality side of things and that program Lithodomos, that to me, I was like, they're doing the most. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
very cool. Very,
That
very
sounds really
cool.
awesome. I've got two questions left for you. So, first question is what museum or exhibit do you feel like you learned the most at? I can go
Learn.
first if you need a minute.
I would love for you to go first. That's a great question. Whew.
So, in I think 2016, me and my best friend went to Europe on a very kind of slapdash trip. Um, that was we were just kind of like we were like we're gonna start in Ireland and then we're just gonna go from there. And we ended up
Amazing.
in France, and he was a really good sport. It was actually really great because I'm also a classics person, and we ended up in France, and I'm like, so the next town over, there's like an amphitheater. Could we go? And he's like, yeah, sure, okay. And he was a great sport. So I dragged him through the French countryside, and we
Oh,
went
oh, he
to.
would have had such a horrible time.
No, he says often he's like, I think I learned more because I was with you than I would have if I had just gone by myself. And I'm like, aw.
Amazing.
So we went to this Coliseum, and I think it was either in, I think it might have been in Arles. This was really interesting because it actually had interpretive panels throughout the arena that talked
Wow.
about like the different type of fighters, who was fighting, and it had like pictures and like this is the net guy. I don't remember the Latin word for it, but here's the net guy. He would usually fight this type of guy. And it was like 7 years ago at this point, so I don't remember a ton of it. But I remember just being like, oh, I actually learned a lot after this.
Mm.
And again, it had that impact of like, we're here where they would have fought. It put things into context, and it was like, I feel like, and maybe this is just me from like my North American perspective, but I feel like there's a lot of assumption that people have, like, you know what a gladiator is,
Mm.
here you go. But this like really broke it down in a really interesting way. And just again, that impact of actually being there, I thought was really, really interesting.
Well, and
Um,
actually, sharing the complexity of it with you in a way that you were able to read and
yeah.
understand and follow. Like, that's awesome.
Instead of just like, here's this arena, people fought here, check it out. It
It was
was
a
like,
thing. There were lions, occasionally ocean battles.
yeah,
It was cool.
yeah.
Mm. No, that's a really good answer. God damn. Okay. I would say Museo Larco. Honestly, I think that museum in Peru was incredibly special, and also, frankly, it's not my area of history.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when I'm in those bigger museums, those kind of like blockbustery museums, because I love it, I'm drawn to all the classic stuff, but I'm not necessarily absorbing a whole bunch of information that I didn't learn at uni. So then I find myself gravitating to my favorite little buddies
To what you
when I
know.
what I know, and I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
god, yes, this is so pretty, and it's like, oh, there's like a 0.5% variation on this like a gorgon. I'm like, yes, let's go, rather than being like, okay, Napoleonic France, let's party, which is probably, if I want to be my like best academic self, that's probably what I should start doing. But I can, we can talk about that later. So, um but so when I was in that museum in Peru, I was like, I was essentially, my bucket was empty. And so then it was just like, here we go, all of it, the timeline, the dates, the different cultures, the histories, the mythology, the religion, everything. I was just like, oh my God, let's go, let's go, let's go. Because, of course, there wasn't a lot of ancient Greek or Roman stuff there. So I couldn't just rest on my laurels and go and, and put the kind of classical artifacts within my own frame of reference and orient it and be like, okay, that's that period. Okay, I know who that is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, da, 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 da. It was much more just like
Completely
this.
out of your depth.
Exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's similar to my part B answer, which would have to be the Egyptian Museum in Cairo.
Ooh.
So that's one. And, I feel like if you're learning classics, ancient Egypt, like she's there. She's there. Even if we're not directly boogieing with
She's
her,
gonna
some
come
of
up at
it,
one point or
oh,
another. Yeah.
right? It's just like osmosis. Some of it's getting in there, whether you want
Yeah.
it to or not. It's just kind of like permeating your brain, like throughout the whole thing. So I went in, I've never been particularly drawn to it, but I had like a very vague familiarity with like a third of it, to the
Mm-hmm.
point where I was like, okay, I kind of know who like four of these dudes are. All right. I'm kind of comfortable talking about these kind of periods. Okay. And then I went in, and again, same thing. Bucket was like a tenth full. So I was like, let's go. Let's go. Let's go. I was like, this is fantastic. And I learned about so many different historical figures that were fabulous. And we had a really good guide, and we were traveling with a group of people that are all very, very curious. So the
Oh,
whole
that's great.
dynamic,
Yeah.
oh, the whole dynamic was the group just being like, okay, but what about that? Okay, but what about that? Who's that? What? Like, tie it all together in some big historical narrative for us. So I was just there being like, oh my God.
As somebody who regularly gives tours as like part of my job, and it's super fun to give tours,
It's
but there
so
is
good.
nothing better than people who have questions. They're like,
Mm.
this might be a stupid question. And I'm like, No,
No,
there's no
no,
such thing. Like,
not a
hit me
thing.
with all of them, please.
Just ask me where the loo is. Just talk to me. Just
Yeah,
engage with me, please.
yeah.
I imagine the worst thing would be just like a bunch of people just staring at you, being like,
I've
and you're just like,
definitely had, like, there's definitely people who are just there that they just want to read the panels and
mhm,
be left alone. And you know what? That is
fair
everybody
enough.
experiences it differently. And maybe you're just like not you're not feeling it today and you just want to be with the panels, and like
For me,
completely
it
respect
depends on
that.
my mood. Sometimes I'm in a real panel. Don't talk to me. I'm not.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with
100%.
that.
No,
But
no, no.
if you can give guided tours a chance and be try and show up, even if like, or at least bring somebody who you know will ask questions, and
Yeah,
then you can
someone who's
always just
very
like ride their
extroverted.
coattails. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
having somebody ask questions and engage in that way, it gets the tour guide excited,
Mm,
and it also
mhm,
it's just a really good time.
mm. Most harrowing museum experience. Go.
I haven't necessarily had like a bad tour guide or anything like that, but I recently went. I'm not going to name names because it is a local museum,
Oh,
and
oh, a little one. Okay.
it's a local little museum, and it means well, but it is
Oh no.
run by volunteers. There was one paid staff member last I heard. Everything had a very homemade vibe. It was very obvious that there was no um like collections care happening. It was very obvious. Like, I saw things that were rusting.
Oh,
There was like a little bit of mold growing on like an exhibit label,
oh my
and
God.
all of the interpretation was like different. Like the some of it was like straight up like construction paper, like pasted on construction paper and cardboard, and then some of it was not so. It was a mess. it,
Oh,
it is a mess. There was like attempts at like a narrative through it, but then there was just like random chunks of like specific historical things that pertain to the topic. I'm trying to remain vague here on purpose.
you don't want to
um,
tell on yourself by mistake.
yes, I couldn't turn my museum brain off. I have a hard time doing that just in general in museums, I think now,
No, and
being in
especially seeing
this.
something like that, it just would have been so like,
You're just like, oh,
oh.
I can see the potential. I can see the
Mm,
potential. If you put like $50 into this on like just some like nice
good
foam
paper,
core and cardstock, and like got like the same font going on here, folks, that would be great.
consistent. Oh,
Like it was
oh my days.
so
That's a good answer.
yeah,
That's.
it's I when I think of bad museums, I think of that place.
I'm trying to think if I've seen anything that's been like that. I mean, and I'm this was a fabulous museum, but it was in Sudan, and we were there about a week after the coup broke out, so the museum was actually closed.
Oh
But yeah, so and a lot of that was in huge amounts of disrepair and was falling apart. Um, but obviously, Sudan doesn't have the resources to pour their money to upkeep of those kind of museums. But I remember seeing that and being quite heartbroken, and like it's
mm-hmm.
completely understandable, but it is
It's the reality of the situation.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And it's like, I'm very far from sitting here and telling you to pour any of your money into the museum, but just of
yeah,
course, like when you've got the history museum archaeologist brain and you're just kind of like, oh my
yeah,
babies, I just want to put a tarp over all of you. Fuck.
yeah. Yeah,
Which is wildly impractical. But
we could honestly do a whole other video just about like conflict and cultural heritage.
maybe we should, because we haven't even spoken about Rapa Nui, and I'd like a whole bunch of stuff to talk about there. So
I
we
don't even
could
know what that is. So.
Easter Island, the big old head dudes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of tea there that we don't have time for right
I guess just like closing thoughts,
now.
favorite
Yeah.
museums and everything that we've talked about. because we've talked about a lot. We've talked
Which we
about,
knew was
yeah, we've talked about design, we've talked about impact, we've talked about like heritage sites versus museums. We've talked a lot about just like what makes an enjoyable museum experience, what makes a good museum. I think that we really, really kind of dove into that, which was super fun. So
I think we've covered a lot.
yeah. I guess I just want to say thank you for chatting with me for this very long period of time at this point.
It was an absolute pleasure. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So once again, you can find Cosi on Instagram and on TikTok, and on Twitter, and all of those places. So please go and give her a follow. And I hope you have a good day/evening, and I will see you next time.
I think also just some chaotic splices of both of us like this would be quite funny.
Yes. Just like randomly cut in the middle of it. They won't even notice.
Or just you and I like this. Hello. Perfect.
Thumbnail right there. Perfect.
Hell yeah.